All right, and we're back. I'm Randall Ledet Jr., and then we got Hunter Ziesman here. This is a new SEC podcast, Week 5 recap. We're going to talk a little bit about what we saw around the country, some games that affected playoff implications and standings across the country in various conferences, Power 4 conferences, Group of 5 conferences. And in the SEC, we had some winners and losers. This week, I think, gave us kind of our heaviest schedule of games in terms of the weight of the games, some even matchups. Oklahoma and Auburn felt pretty even. A&M and versus Arkansas felt pretty even. And, the end of the, we'll say, UFC fight card, the main card game, Alabama, Georgia, once again delivered absolute cinema. Hunter, tell me about your weekend, football-wise, the feelings, all over the place. What do you have?
It was solid, man. It was a solid weekend. I mean, you mentioned some winners, some losers, like 5 SEC games, 5 teams have to win, 5 have to lose, shakes it up. Alabama, Georgia, right, was the heavyweight fight. I'm an Alabama fan, so, I was waiting for the game on Saturday night, and I didn't even realize it. I was out in Denver, Colorado, ended up at a Georgia watch party at a bar. So the whole bar packed with Georgia fans, and the energy in there when we went up 28-0 at the beginning was crazy.
Yeah.
We were firing, but it was a good week of football, even aside from the Alabama-Georgia game.
Yeah, definitely a great weekend of football. And I mean, I can only imagine, how many people were barking in there. I'm sure some people on the Tide side were barking as well. Just a bunch of dogs and some elephants or some Roll Tide fans there. But great game. I mean, we'll get into it later. And this episode, we're going to kind of just give more of our thoughts around each team. We love stock up, stock down, power ranking type thoughts, but just give the listeners and the viewers something that they probably feel themselves, right? Like, is this team up? Is this team down? Like, where do they go from here? And I think this slate of games gave us a lot of that. Around the country, when we're talking about just the playoff implications, starting in the ACC, we got an interesting game with Miami, Virginia Tech. Tech had the lead most of the game, and there was a controversial call at the end, and there was a controversial review and call at the end as well in that game. So, any takeaways you had from Miami's performance or Virginia Tech's performance?
Yeah, I mean, Miami still is going to be like the ACC's number 1 contender right now. Like, it's a conference game, so anybody can win. But Virginia Tech going into Miami and getting so close, like whether it was a touchdown or not, it feels pretty rough for Virginia Tech fans. I think Miami can still be that team for the ACC. They have game day there when they play Cal this next week. But teams are right on their heels. Like Clemson's right on the heels. Louisville had the close game with Notre Dame that they lost.
Yeah.
So the ACC, we're starting to get that picture of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and he had some other teams. I think Duke's at 5-0 right now. So you never know what they can do. But I feel like the main brands, right, Miami and Clemson are still kind of the reigning class there. And Virginia Tech is, fighting to be in that conversation, but 2-3 right now. So definitely not where they pictured themselves being. In the Big 12, I think I would say the two main games that we saw, at least what I watched, was Arizona taking down Utah.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people that follow college football closely knew the Big 12 would be wide open, but it looks like it's a year where everyone's just going to kind of play this, I'm going to beat you, and then you're going to beat me, and then, kind of just this round robin of wins and losses.
Yeah, and then BYU getting the win. So right there, at the back half of the AP poll, you have those Big 12 teams sitting there. So it's like, if you're going to get one to that, top 4 spot, but like in depending on how it all shakes out for the rest of the year, are you going to get a second and third team in there? Because they're not looking, as strongly. Boise State looks almost stronger than a lot of the Big 12 teams at this point.
Yeah, and I think you could definitely make the case, right? I think especially with Boise having that game against Oregon, although it was a loss, it was a close loss, and probably the toughest competition that we've seen. But we'll say Boise State in the Big 12 out of conference playing other opponents, right? We saw Oklahoma State played Arkansas, but we haven't seen a ton of comparative tests around what the Big 12 looks like out of conference. So we can only really go off of what they have in conference. Kansas State rebounded, got a win this weekend, so they're in that mix. And Iowa State still undefeated. They took down my Houston Cougars. The Cougars, I think they have not scored a touchdown in 2 games now, so it's always fun.
Yeah.
In the Big Ten, which is, we'll say the SEC is the AFC, if we're doing the NFL analogy. and the Big Ten is supposed to be the NFC, supposed to be the second best conference. When we look at the teams that are top from top to bottom, Oregon took care of business. Ohio State probably had one of the most dominant performances of the season against Michigan State. We can talk about what Michigan State means as an opponent, but just business as usual for Ohio State. They're the masterclass. Michigan is still in that third kind of spot, or third or fourth spot. And then we got to see Illinois versus Penn State. That was the other game going on at 7:30, ranked versus ranked matchup.
Yeah. Yes, Penn State looked good. I mean, whether Michigan is a top 10 team in the country, I don't think many people would say that Michigan is a top 10 team in the country, but they're going to play some games later this year to earn it or, bump them back down. So the Big Ten starting to ramp up competition. It was good to see the Oregon game, see what they could do. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's, I think it's up for debate, right? Like we understand this is not last year's Michigan team. I think it'll be really interesting once the playoff rankings come out. I think they're going to take more of a format, taking into consideration, if we rank this team this high, we're saying that this is the best team in that conference. We're not just saying that they have the best record or they've played the best teams. Like, we think this is the best team. So what right now Michigan's at 10. Does that mean they're the 10th? Like, are they an automatic bid spot or at-large spot? The jury's out, right? I think there's a lot of football we played, but that offense, to me, doesn't really intimidate me compared to Ohio State's offense and Oregon's offense.
Yeah, I mean, in the last year, if you were looking at the projected, if you would have taken last year's spread and put that into this 12-team playoff bracket, it was like, who is that group of 12 team? And no one really looked like they fit the bill. Like, Liberty would have been the one, but now we have Boise State and UNLV both ranked this week. So it's like those teams are making their way up to where they, at the end of the season, if Ashton Genty at Boise State keeps playing like he has been, and UNLV, who cares what quarterback they got? If they keep playing like they are, I mean, one of them might earn it just outright.
They might earn outright. No, crazy. Seriously, no kidding. It's an opportunity for maybe the group of 5 gets 2 bids. I mean, the odds are probably low,
wild.
But it's a possibility depending on how UNLV looks, and obviously Boise State looks good. I think having a Heisman candidate running back helps their case from an entertainment value perspective. And then, I mean, even in the American, the armed academies, I think Navy and Army are both undefeated. So that's a conference that traditionally has gotten the New Year's 6 spot. So that's where I usually look to see where that group of 5 spot's going to be potentially as well.
Rank them, rank Army, rank Navy, put them in there.
Put them in there, man. I mean, hey, that old option. So
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, I mean, you're keeping Louisville in there, keeping Illinois in there. Put one of the service academies in.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Why not? But UNLV was probably the most fun story. I mean, they took down Fresno State dominantly. Diehard or casual followers saw what happened with the quarterback there sitting out because of the NIL dispute, and the backup came right in and took care of business. So probably doesn't fully help his case, but UNLV is legit. They're definitely legit, and they play Syracuse this week too. So props to them for scheduling 3 Power 4 conference teams to start the season.
Yeah, and that's a good look around the country. The SEC still 9 teams in the AP poll now, still kind of reigning at the top as we expected going into the year. But SEC plays opening. We had 5 SEC games, like we said, this week.
Yeah.
LSU also played an out-of-conference opponent for 6 total games, and there were some good ones, right? Like, so maybe we go ahead and get into it, right?
Yeah, we could definitely get into it. And like you said, to your nine ranked teams, all signs lead back to the SEC. They are ultimately the measuring stick of how good you are, and that's why this conference has the most teams ranked currently. And so when we look at this week's slate, 5 SEC on SEC games, let's get right into it. There's a lot of thoughts, a lot of headlines, if you will. So got to go with the most impressive win, you could argue. I guess opponent-wise, maybe I don't know how the game went, but Alabama, a winner on the day. A tale of 2 halves. Hunter, what are your thoughts on that?
And Roll Tide. No, the game was good in the first half, right? Like, the Alabama came out and they showed a completely different look than we've seen them play this year offensively. They opened up the playbook a little bit. We saw Milroe open up his passing a little bit more, and Georgia didn't really have an answer from their offense. Beck looked a little shaky. Couldn't really find his rhythm until late into the second half. And you mentioned the tale of 2 halves where, like, as Georgia came back into the game, I think Alabama let their foot off the gas a little bit following the halftime. We saw the pass interference at the end of the half, and that could have led to some points. But they took their foot off the gas, and Georgia got back into it and led to a closer game, I think, than Alabama wanted after the start that they had.
Yeah, it definitely led to a closer game than what they wanted after the start of that first half. And I think you remember me texting you at halftime, like, if the game ends right now, what are your thoughts? And there's some things that we've said over those texts that really just that first half of football, Alabama looked like a team that could not be slain in the college football landscape. They didn't come out like that against Wisconsin, and they played well. They didn't come out like that against USF, and ultimately played well like that against the best team that they've played this season. Super impressive. Like you said in the reel, if you listen to our shorts, we're gonna see some things that we hadn't seen from Jalen Milroe. Saw that.
Yeah.
We're gonna see Ryan Williams go down the field. I mean, he earned the Hollywood nickname on that stage. So we saw a lot of that. But on the other side, for the offense, we didn't see as much in the second half, and it could come from one of two places, right? Like there were key stops that Georgia made, but there was some conservative play calling, it felt, in some ways, to kind of hold that lead and hold that large lead they had that put them in a spot to have to come back with 2 minutes left in the game.
Yeah, it felt a lot more conservative there in the second half. And, at the beginning, it was things that caught Georgia off guard. I don't think that they were really expecting to see Milroe be able to pass out of empty like he was able to do. They were really focusing on getting pressure, leaving some guys open in the middle. We saw him dump off to a lot of the tight ends, finding receivers that had some separation. And I think it caught Georgia off guard early on. So they had some adapting. So it's definitely some credit to the Georgia defense and Alabama, trying to find that rhythm in the second half. But I think a lot of it was taking the foot off the gas from a coaching standpoint. So going forward, I think it was a good learning lesson for Alabama on just because you're up, 30-3 or 28-0 at one point, like, it doesn't mean to stop. You have to keep going in the SEC because teams are solid. Carson Beck, although he played very, very poorly at the beginning of the game, he turned it back on. So if you're Alabama, you have to continue to drive offensively and show that different offense that we saw from them.
Definitely. And when I think about Alabama, like, to me, the question is, did this close win impress you? And I tell you how I feel on the other side is Alabama this year is very legit, and they're scarier than last year because, they made the playoffs last year. That was Jalen Milroe's first year starting. This is his second full year just getting started. Up until this past week, he led the nation in touchdowns. I think it's Cam Ward now, but I mean, he dominated on the run, 2 touchdowns. He dominated in the air. And if they can do that for 4 quarters with what that defense showed, how can you sit here and say there's a better team in the country when you look at who Texas played to get to number 1, Michigan? When you look at, other teams and who they've played this far, I don't know who you could say is better, and they look scarier when you have someone like Ryan Williams that just showing us things that we've never seen before. I'm not going to mention his age, but I mean, like, the coordination, just the big playability. You just pull the helmet down and you just go straight for 75 like it's no one's business. Like, this team is scary. And they passed their first test of 2 when it comes to some of the tougher games in their schedule this year with Tennessee and Missouri, and probably the hardest one.
Yeah, and teams have to keep track of both now. It was early on in the season. It was like, okay, what does Milroe's passing look like? He was really airing it out downfield. This game, he only threw 3 balls over 20 yards and connected on all of them. So they were able to spread the ball out a little bit more to in different areas of the field, and it tested Georgia. And they're going to have tests later this year, right? They play Tennessee. They're going to play Oklahoma. They're going to play Auburn. And we know how that game can always go. But
put some respect on Missouri's name, man.
I'll put some respect on Missouri's name. But from a defense, defense is facing them. I think there's some defenses out there that are going to give them a harder time. Tennessee being one of them. But looking at what they did in this game, I think that they're going to pass those tests. Defensively for Alabama, I think was where some people left the game. Like, I don't know, we kind of gave up some plays that we shouldn't have given up. Carson Beck in the game threw 17 balls over 20 yards. So he was kind of heaving it downfield more than he does usually. And it felt like, after the game, man, we gave up a lot of those. We only gave up 5 catches on those 17 attempts. Right. So when they're throwing up those 50-50 balls, things happen sometimes. And it's a 50-50 ball for a reason. And that led to the Xavier Brown pick at the end of the game. You can only do it one too many times before one gets picked off. So the defense did what they needed to do. They might not have got to Carson Beck as much as they wanted to. The O-line there held him off. But they put pressure on him, made him make mistakes. He had 3 picks there and a fumble.
Yep.
So if you get a guy like him out of rhythm, you're going to be able to do that defensively later in the year against these other quarterbacks. I don't think that Brady Cook will be better against the pressure than Carson Beck was, or
No.
Nico. We saw him play against Oklahoma and make some mistakes. So this Georgia team is dangerous. This Alabama team is dangerous. So the only thing I can think is an issue from this game was the fourth down
Yep.
defense, and they gave up 5 for 5 on fourth down, so they were unable to get off the field late in the game, and that's a huge momentum. The stadium
That's a
goes
huge momentum.
quiet.
Yeah, we saw that 4th and 2 conversion on that last drive. I mean, they were driving. They were they being Georgia were in the red zone to outside. That pick doesn't happen. They could have scored. Obvious statement, but like they were in a position where they could have tied the game. And so, we'll have some thoughts on Georgia, but overall, a great performance from Alabama. Huge winner on Saturday. I would say the biggest winner on Saturday, given the game. And, last question for you, what do you think is kind of the heat, the heat check or the grade? How should Alabama fans feel right now?
I think Alabama fans should feel like ecstatic, because the big question going into the season wasn't anything with any player. It was, how do we replace Nick Saban? I don't think there's ever a way to do that. But do we have a guy who can at least continue the legacy of the program? People are calling for a 3-loss season, 4-loss season, whatever it may be. Kalen DeBoer earned his right as the Alabama coach in that game, and he'll be around for a while because of that. Earned some recruits over, earned the players over, earned the fans' hearts for showing some emotion on the sideline there too. So temperature check for this game is hot.
Temperature check for this game is very hot. And is Ryan Williams the best receiver in the country?
Ryan Williams. Maybe it's two
Maybe,
freshman guys.
see.
Ohio State could compete, but I think he is the most electric for sure.
Definitely. Another big winner on the day for Saturday came down in Oxford, but it wasn't Ole Miss. It was Kentucky. If you listen to our last segment, we talked about how strong that Kentucky defense was. And we saw it against Georgia, and we hadn't seen other tests, but we saw it against Georgia. So are we buying or selling Kentucky right now after that win?
I think Kentucky is one of these teams that shows potential to upset teams in the SEC. Now, I don't think Kentucky is a top tier team in the SEC because they could beat Ole Miss, but the way that their defense puts pressure on teams, I think that they're a buy now team, because you're going to see them play some games still that they could win. They're going to play Vanderbilt, and that's a winnable one. But when you look forward to Texas and Tennessee, do they have the potential to upset another playoff contender?
Yeah, and they have that potential, right? I mean, especially when we talk about playing Texas and what we saw for Texas, at least in the first half against Mississippi State, and we'll get to that later. But Kentucky showed us a lot. One of the things that you and I had talked about was wanting to see more on the offensive side, and they did a good job of that, like getting more passes to Barry and Brown, getting Dane Key involved. I think this is probably his second time being on national television this year, and if you tune in to them, you see he's a playmaker, right? He is Mr. Reliable, made some key plays in that game. And so that offense showed up just enough. And that defense was able to startle Jackson Dart and the what was the top 5 offense in the country going into that game.
Yeah. And we said it from the offensive side. We're like, this Kentucky team, they just need to get their playmakers involved. Like, we want to see Dane Key, we want to see Barry and Brown. And this was the game that they were able to do that. So I think before, he was looking for this perfect window. He was trying to stay clean in the pocket, and he ended up targeting Dane Key more times than this game that he even had attempts in the South Carolina game. Yep. So he's starting to find his rhythm. My favorite thing was seeing him test the receivers. We saw the first Dane Key touchdown where he put the ball in a very tough spot and just let the guy make plays, because they're good receivers. So we saw a couple across the middle where if they didn't get separation, he was still going to try to weave the ball in there for them. So if they can continue to do that offensively with the defense that they had and putting the pressure on Jackson Dart, the sky is the limit for these upcoming games.
Yeah, they definitely have a good opportunity to kind of make some runs here. Especially you got Vandy coming up, you got Florida coming up, and you got Auburn. Now you're thinking, those are two, we'll say 2 swing games. I think Florida should be a win, but three, we'll say 2 or 3 swing games. And now you got 4 or 5 wins potentially. But back to this game, like, this is a big deal for Kentucky. I'm sure everyone in Lexington knows that. Mark Stoops kind of gets that monkey off his back of beating certain ranked teams, and I think it's safe to say that Ole Miss should be ranked by the end of the season, so that should hold out to be a ranked win. And I'm buying their stock. I'm buying it in terms of that is a quality win. It solidifies, just to me, they're better than just a bowl team. And like you said, they have that upset ability. That defense is very impressive. And so like they were the first team to really slow down Jackson Dart from what we've seen.
Yeah, and after that first drive, I was kind of like, because what we were worried about was the safety play and then being able
Yeah.
to throw across the middle, and they marched right down and did it. But then after that, they held them to only 271 yards in the air, and they did it without their number one corner. Marcus Harrison was out for the day, and he hasn't let up a touchdown all year. And if they did that without him against someone like Jackson Dart, whatever you want to say about Ole Miss's resume up to this point, it's still a huge thing that they did in getting the pressure. Ole Miss, they love that play action passing. And if you look at the stats in this game and how they were trying to get that, they would run the play action, but the play was blown up because Kentucky just getting through the line too fast. So they're making teams, get off of their game plan. That's how they did against Georgia, how they did against Ole Miss here in this game. So I like it. Offensively, I got to ask, they got Gavin Wimsatt, that quarterback, the Rutgers transfer in to run the ball.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that you could see them continuing to do and getting like a guy in there just to run? He didn't throw the ball at all.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's working, so I could see them continue to do that. I mean, obviously, it helped them towards the end of the game there, and maybe they'll expand his package and have a pass option. I feel like it could be kind of like a Tebow-esque situation where it's like run, and then he has a jump pass or some form of a like rollout type situation. But I feel like if UK is going to keep being in these gritty SEC games, whether it's against Georgia or Ole Miss, you got to pull out all the stops, especially if it's these type of situations where you're playing with nothing to lose.
Yeah, get creative.
Yeah. So buy or sell. If you're listening to this segment, like let us know what you think. But I'm buying right now. This is a team that you might not want to play with that defense. And then on the other side, there was a loser in this game, Ole Miss. But everything that you want is still in front of you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have a pretty good slate ahead. We talked about Ole Miss at the beginning of the year, like can they be this undefeated team? Now they come off of this, and it's like, okay, well, what other games could they potentially drop? We tiered them out at the beginning of the year as a top tier team. What tier do you feel like Ole Miss is in the SEC now?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about if to answer that question, I would say like that championship tier, like national championship SEC championship tier. To me, Ole Miss jumped one down. So if they were in the one tier, I'm going to put them in the two tier. My one tier has got Bama, it's got Georgia, it's got Tennessee, and my two tier in Texas is my one tier as well. My two tier has Missouri and now Ole Miss.
Okay.
Bama jumped to the one tier recently, but like back to Ole Miss, them going down to me is purely because this was their first big test. Wanted to see more on the offensive side. Jackson Dart, I think, only had 1 or 2 touchdowns in the game, but I just, based upon even just when I look at what they were able to do defensively all season, letting this team, letting Brock Vandagriff have a really good game for his standards compared to their average when it comes to passing yards allowed, kind of puts Ole Miss down. They have an opportunity to get back up. And when they have this game next week against South Carolina, a team that Kentucky lost to, right? As well as other games this season for them, but they still have more to prove. And the reason that is, and I'm going as a point here, but the reason that is because I believe most people for Ole Miss felt like, okay, your schedule is very backloaded. Number one. You got the monkey off your back. You got a New Year's 6 win last year. You return a great team, but you haven't proven yet you can beat the Georgias. So if you haven't proven you can't beat the Georgias, losing to Kentucky doesn't, for me, keep you in that championship tier. If Kentucky continues to have a strong season, that changes. If Ole Miss continues to look strong against inferior opponents and they handle business against Georgia, or they win that game, they're back in that championship tier for me.
Yeah. So, without being too critical of Ole Miss, like to me, they're 0-1 in games that matter to their resume. Like they've played 4 games this year against teams that, like, if you lose, it matters. Sure. But when we're looking down the end and they're picking the teams to be in the playoffs, no one's looking at what you did against Wake Forest. They want to know what you did in SEC games. And I don't even think that this one initially was one that was supposed to be at that
Yep.
point, right? Like they're looking ahead to those Texas or Oklahoma games in the future that they're going to have. And I think that they dropped a tier for me as well, because I just can't say that the offense was able to fire on all cylinders. Now, Kentucky
Yeah.
defense, I'll give them credit. I'll give Oklahoma or Ole Miss a little bit of credit against this Kentucky defense, because they are tough and they were still able to drive down initially and score. We know that they have that. But like you mentioned it, Kentucky's offense, which has struggled all year, you made them look like they had they have it. So
Yeah.
if you're going to do that and you're playing, LSU, I think you're going to get diced up by someone like Nussmeier if you're doing it to someone like, Brock Vandagriff.
Exactly. And that's where, like, to get into that higher tier, show me more against South Carolina defensively, show me more against LSU offensively, like, which should be easy with LSU's defense and where they rank in the SEC. For South Carolina, this is another great defensive test for you. Like, we've seen what they can do this season. Show me more in that game. You're going to probably face a stronger rushing offense in that game as well with South Carolina. So that's kind of where I think about when I think about Ole Miss, like what they can do to get back up to that championship class. The schedule's favorable. We've talked about it. I think if you don't think the schedule's favorable, we can agree or disagree. But the schedule's very favorable. You got Oklahoma. That's a little tougher game. LSU could be tough. SC could be tough, but you're only playing one of the 4 championship class teams.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia does not afford that same luxury. Oklahoma is not afforded that same luxury. Alabama is not afforded that same luxury. So take advantage, and you got to win with some style points to me. So that's what I need to see from the kind of move up a class.
Yeah, I think they'll need to step up defensively, because you are going to play teams like Georgia who, if you let them, they can score points. We saw them score against Alabama late. Trey Amos in coverage was a little bit of a liability, giving up those 2 penalties, getting diced up out there. So you got to play a clean game once you're starting to get tested by receivers who are athletes, top tier athletes, and not when you're winning games by 30 or 40 points. You got to have that composure and not let them get those easy first downs. So for Ole Miss, the path forward is fine. They're going to play Florida. They're going to play Arkansas. They're going to play Mississippi State. They're going to be fine.
Yep.
I just think they drop down a little bit for me.
Yeah.
So they have a huge statement game against South Carolina coming up. If they can win that game, like you mentioned, with some style points, they're back. It sucks that they lost this game at home, though.
It does. Really does. The home loss is tough. And I mean, if you look straight box score, it's like Trey Harris had a good game. So like build on that, right? 1 touchdown, over 100 yards. When you think about, what we saw defensively, they were able to force Kentucky to have to kick field goals. So just more on the offensive side and win with style points in these games, like you have proven to do, to validate those first couple tune-up games on the schedule. So we'll see what goes on in Oxford, but again, everything's still in front of them. There's a couple teams that are trying to vie for that SEC championship that have one SEC loss, so they're in a position now where they're kind of keep winning, hope that teams like Tennessee and Missouri lose, right? So it should be interesting for them out there in Oxford.
That's right.
Another winner on the day comes from the Southwest Classic. This is I think the 10th year or 11th year they've played it in AT&T Stadium, Jerry World as they call it, and Texas A&M was victorious. Good game. I think it was 21-17. And so Reed the way, Marcel Reed. This could be his team now. And in A&M fashion, we got to go extremes. When you win 2 in a row, are there playoff aspirations now or what?
You got to wonder, is there playoff aspirations? There's really nothing to say that they are not in the right direction for it. They have the schedule ahead with some winnable games and going for it. They're moving in the right direction. Like we talked in the beginning of the year, their defense should have been top tier based on everything that we saw coming into the season. They didn't perform that well week 1 at home against Notre Dame, but they've only gotten better. The defense was pretty swarming in this game for Arkansas, getting the turnovers. Nick Scorton and Shamart Stewart were dangerous behind the line, getting fumbles each, kind of blowing up the game. They got the strip sack there to end it. So I think that right now this Texas team, while I don't think that right now they're a playoff bound by any means, I think that they have the caliber of talent to get there, and they have the ability to win every game that they need ahead to get to that point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I was thinking about this this weekend. One thing they do in the SEC and across the nation is power rankings. And I had this analogy of like if you watch golf, there's a cut every Saturday, or halfway through the tournament is a cut. So to me, the SEC playoff cut lies with Texas A&M, and that team changes, right? I think last week I might have said it was LSU. I think A&M's the cutoff, right? Right under A&M, I'd probably put Arkansas and then Kentucky, and not in that
Mhm.
order. But there's a crop of 7 or 8 teams that are vying for playoff spots. Not all of them will get in, but they are still in the competition, right? So they're vying for that cut, and there's a large pot to get first. That the pot is you get to have a first round bye, and then the pot gets less, but the pot's still good because there's seeding, right? So if you're the second team, or you're the second person in the cut, we'll say that is in this case Tennessee, you get the second highest seed in the playoffs for the SEC, right? A&M is in that spot where they're on the bubble, but they're in it. And
Yeah.
and I think this performance against Arkansas, making it clear that they were the better team, forcing Taylor Green to turn the ball over 2 times again, and what we saw defensively, Le'Veon Moss, being able to rush on this very strong rushing defense when it comes to Arkansas, which was top 4 in the SEC. They showed me that they have a good formula here. There's some chemistry when it comes on the offensive side, and the defense is doing what Mike Elko was brought in to help them do, defend
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And even like the box score doesn't tell the story of this game, because if you look at the touchdowns that Arkansas did score, the Taylor Green scramble where he threw it deep for the first touchdown of the game, they were there behind the line instantly. Like they
Yeah.
missed him barely. Good for Taylor Green to get out of there, but it was such a close miss. And then the Quinton Jackson touchdown where he banged it out to the left, they were through to blow up the play in the backfield. He's one of the best running backs in, the SEC, if
Oh,
not
yeah.
football, with his talent, banged it outside and got past them, but they were there on both of those and they could have gone differently. They were kind of madmen on the rush getting to him and
Yeah.
changed the game plan for Arkansas. You mentioned Le'Veon Moss turning it on late. They made some of those adjustments. And, with Marcel Reed going forward, it's like, you have this guy who's winning games. How do you move back to Connor Wegman, who's extremely talented, when you have this guy who's a dual threat? Teams are playing him differently than they would be playing Connor Wegman. We've seen the meta for college football is to have a quarterback who can do both. So
Yeah.
how do you go away from a guy like Marcel Reed? I don't know. I mean, all things are starting to click and connect. But they're the 9th best team in the SEC for AP poll. So it's like they're going to continue to improve, but like they're right, like you mentioned, kind of on that fringe of what we consider, playoff team.
Definitely. They're in that fringe spot, but they have a couple teams that are ahead of them coming up, like ahead of them in terms of that playoff spot, ahead of them in terms of my golf cut analogy, right? You got Missouri coming up. Another heavily weighted game to me that should make a statement on who is better. Like how A&M comes out, how Missouri comes out. Does A&M handle that passing offense where we've seen Brady Cook look good, but not as much as we've wanted to see from him, right? Are they
Yeah.
able to slow down him on the ground? Are they able to slow that running game down for Missouri? Then you after the bye, I think you have LSU, or you have Mississippi State, then you have LSU. So LSU is another one of those teams that's probably 2 spots above them in the cut. Show us what you got, but
Mhm.
you got to feel good about what you did against Arkansas. It wasn't a perfect game, right? There's certainly some stops that Arkansas made, but you found a way to win. You
Mhm.
got the ball rolling, right? Like you got a new coach and you're still winning. And so
Yeah.
maybe it's okay for Texas fans to aspire to playoff aspirations, when your only loss is coming to a ranked Notre Dame at this point, right? So
Yeah. And the schedule looking forward benefits their path to the playoffs or to, whatever aspirations they have, because the remaining road games are Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Auburn. Auburn at home is like maybe the easiest team in the SEC right now, because 2-3 at home.
yeah.
Mississippi State, South Carolina is great, but it's a winnable game. They're getting all of their tough matchups at home. They get LSU in College Station. They get Texas in College Station at the end of the year. So it's there. They're doing something different on defense. They're showing a lot of really interesting looks, showing blitz, dropping back into coverage, bringing it from the slot, slot corner, how to sack there on the day. So I like what I'm seeing from Texas A&M, and yeah, I think that they have potential to upset teams and make
Yep.
a run.
Yeah, definitely. I think that 4 through 8 is a lot closer than we think when it comes to the SEC, and A&M has a chance to prove that, and they prove it in those games. They'll fulfill what these playoff aspirations seem to look like after beating an Arkansas team. There was another game that went on that we talked about a little bit earlier, but we'll go back to it. Is the Alabama Georgia game? I mean, that was the game of the year. Probably a top 5 game in the last 5 years, some could say. And we talked about the winner in Alabama, but we need to talk about the team that did not win the game, and that was Georgia. Georgia came into this game number 2 in the nation. They were favored. And the question really was, what went wrong for Georgia early, and what should the temperature be on this team?
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's a Georgia team that turned it on late, and had they been able to do it early, they would have been fine. So I mean, what really went wrong for them is the offensive game plan not clicking, right? We've seen 16 quarters of Georgia football so far this year, and 9 of them have been poor offensive quarters. Like, they've played more poor offensive quarters than they have good ones. Started out slow against Clemson. They didn't really perform at all well offensively against Kentucky. And then we saw them, get a late start here. And a lot of that falls on Carson Beck's shoulders, in my opinion. If we're going to give him credit at the end of the game, we got to give him credit, for the 3 picks and the fumble, and just not clicking. Dominic Lovett did have the drop early on that kind of set the tone for the game, the offensive pass interference following that. So, I think that right now what went wrong for them early is just the offensive game plan not clicking. You put your defense back on the field too many times and gave Alabama, 3 or 4 drives in the first quarter of the game.
Yep. Yeah. And that's really the tale of the first half, and the tale, for the majority of the season, like you said. And this, we understand who Hunter likes necessarily, but this is what I hear living in Atlanta. I talk to Georgia fans all the time, and they talk about this Mike Bobo offense versus the previous offensive coordinator, and some of their, just concerns they've had from what they've seen in this offense. You had talked about it in our Alabama segment. Like, they threw the ball, I think, over 20 times, over 20 yards.
17
right?
times, yeah.
17
5 for
times.
17.
5 for 17 for over 20 yards. The rushing game stats wise wasn't that impressive from Etienne, and that's a byproduct of how the game was called. And what Alabama was able to do defensively. And that really became the handicap for this game, because on the other side of those offensive woes, I feel like it is equally or more impressive to be able to come back after halftime, down on the road. You're favored. You were in this spot last week against Kentucky, and you're able to get a couple drives and get the lead with 2 minutes left. Like, being down 28-zip, if you were able to get that game within 7 and lose, to me, that took them from, I don't know if the Georgia team can compete for a championship this year, to, okay, like, Alabama's the final boss in a video game.
Yeah.
They're the closest competition to being the final boss. And not many people can beat the final boss, but they're the ones that give them the biggest challenge. And so, bringing it back for Georgia in the second half, you get that lead. You start to see more from Dominic Lovett. You start to see Beck look a little bit more comfortable. And you wonder, okay, you cut those turnovers in half. This is a completely different game.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be positive about if you're a Georgia fan. I mean, you played on the road in Tuscaloosa. It's a hard place to play. I don't think that you necessarily planned for what Alabama was going to show.
Yeah.
So, there was those defensive adjustments in the second half. Like, hey, we gotta shift this. This guy's gonna pass a little bit more. We saw some different looks, so that we have to adjust to. Carson Beck put some passes right on the money. You had some receivers that made some great catches. One of the questions going in was, do we have some playmakers offensively? Dominic Lovett showed it. They were able to move the ball well in that second half. You just want to see it consistently, because Alabama, when you played Clemson and you played Kentucky, if it took you a slow start, it was fine, because those teams were starting slow too.
Yep.
And you're in this game, Alabama didn't start slow, but if you're Georgia and you're Georgia's aspirations are not to make a bowl game. It is not to make it to the playoffs.
No.
They want to win the championship.
They year. Expect to be in Atlanta twice.
Exactly. So, is Texas going to afford you the luxury of a slow start? Is Ole Miss going to afford you the luxury of a slow start? Is Tennessee going to afford you that luxury? And I don't think so. So there's going to be a lot of adjustments going forward as to how do we get this offense going sooner. I don't think the answer in this game was to just start heaving the ball, but it worked in times, but it led to the pick there at the end as well. So they didn't get a whole lot of pressure defensively. They made some great stops on some of those mid-range passes. They tackled well, but I think there's just some cleaning up to do.
Definitely, and I think that cleaning up lends to, this is the first time we've seen Georgia look vulnerable, and I'm kind of getting tired of the whole like they don't have Brock Bowers, they don't have Lad McConkey. Like, we get it. You don't have to be the best Georgia team of all time to compete in this year's college football. You just need to be one of the best teams in this season, right?
Yeah.
There's been several Alabama teams that some could say were better than this season's. There have been a lot of Georgia teams, those teams that had Jake Fromm and had Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy. Like, there's some really strong teams that Georgia had. Those teams that win championships. The teams that Stetson Bennett did, those teams are good too. This Georgia team, to me, although the offensive weapons are not this like last year, they have enough to compete. We just need to see it for a full game. It is a little concerning that they appear to be stoppable, but they've proven that they can come back into some of these games, and so they just ideally you don't want to have to play catch up. You don't have to play comeback. You want to come out strong in the first half, and so I think they know that's what they want. It's a matter of, does the offense have the inertia and the players to step up to make that type of play, to make those type of make the game that way. And so that's what I'm looking to see, and I think that's why Georgia, because of this strong test, they have one of the best schedules in the country. This is an AP class schedule. This is not level 3. This is not level 2. This is definitely not Missouri's or Ole Miss's schedule. They have opportunities to knock out people, right? Like, everything is still in front of them. You can still make the SEC championship. You can still make the national championship. You can still make the playoffs, and you kind of control your own destiny. So, like, on one hand, it'd be easier to have an easier schedule, but if you want to be ahead of Tennessee, just beat them. You want to be ahead of Ole Miss, just beat them. Like, you have the opportunity to control your destiny to get in those spots. And ultimately, you played the hardest team you'll play all season, so you're not playing an SEC East schedule anymore. You have real litmus tests, so you should know in that locker room, we took Bama to the wire in a half of football with 4 turnovers.
Yeah.
So let's just make it do what it do and figure it out for a whole game.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, there's a lot to be positive about. There's a lot that they can take from this game. I don't know, what the stats say or anything like that, but this Georgia team, from a staff and player standpoint, they can find the first down marker. Late in the game, they were able to do it. They were 5 for 5 on 4th down. Against Kentucky late when they needed the drive, they were able to do it, to burn out the clock. And then, against Clemson, they were continuously moving the ball later in the game. So if you can, it's almost like when their back's against the wall, they perform better.
Yep.
If you're a Georgia fan, you just don't want to see that early. So I could see the consistency improving going forward. I mean, they have some of the best coaches in college football. So.
Definitely, and I think the one of the last glaring holes that I want to talk to and point to that plays a role in the rest of the season is their rush defense and what it does against running backs and pass and rushing quarterbacks. You got Nico coming in, or you play Nico in a couple weeks. You play Jackson Dart, who has the ability to run. You saw what Jalen Milroe was able to do. It looked like he was barely getting touched.
Yeah.
Should that be a concern with this slate and what we've seen thus far from a rushing defense perspective and how they just were unable to really get near Jalen Milroe?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's a little bit of a concern. I don't think it's maybe as much of a concern as the hole that it showed in this game specifically. I mentioned it a couple of times. I think the play calling from Alabama caught them a little bit off guard. When Alabama got into empty and they started throwing the ball out wide, and it's like, oh, what do we need to do? So they had guys spying him and letting things up. I think in the first half, especially when Milroe was able to kind of run wild and, make some of those plays, especially on the first drive where it was just kind of like, he was moving. Yeah. I don't think that later in the season teams will be as tricky and shifty. And I don't think that those quarterbacks have the ability that Milroe has to test this defense. I think where the defense on the passing side needs to maybe improve on a couple things here and there where they left some Alabama guys a little bit too open here and there.
Yeah. And those are definitely some areas to clean up. And again, when you got guys like Ryan Williams, it's hard to cover all of them, right? Super talented, receiving core receiver himself. And so I think there's a lot on the tape to watch. I think, Kirby, I listened to some of his post game interview, and he just talked about really just, if I'm paraphrasing, empowering his guys, telling him he's proud of them. And just on to the next. And so he's always got his guys ready.
Yeah, they'll be
I-
fine.
They'll be fine. They'll still be in the cream of the crop. Another game that we want to revisit, it took place in Dallas, was the A&M Arkansas game. And from an Arkansas lens, they found themselves in the L column, but some things to take away from the game. Really, Arkansas has found themselves in every game, win or loss. This game was close and close the entire game, and to the very end, and just a game again where it felt like what went well, good on the ground. What was the blocker when it comes to them winning the game? Was really turnovers and just making the right plays at the right time. So how can Arkansas find a way to close out and win games like Oklahoma State and like A&M, like we saw from Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, they're not. It's so close. It's close games that could have gone either way. This Arkansas team could be 5-0 right now. Like, they had that when they had the ball at the end of this game. I was like, okay, we're going to see another drive like Oklahoma State, where with a couple, less than a minute left, they're going to drive down and put themselves in position to tie it up or win the game in this situation. And then you have the strip sack, and it's like, it just kills all momentum. They're tied for 111th in college football in turnovers this year. Like, they're just, I don't like just always using the word sloppy, but it's sloppy ball.
Yeah.
So when you're in these close games, you don't want to be shooting yourself in the foot. And I think it falls on a couple different people's shoulders. I think, coaching first and foremost, but your offensive line is letting people through. We talked in the last episode about issues with Keyshawn Blackstock, the right tackle there. And there's a problem in this game as well. Probably one of the worst offensive line performances of the season for Arkansas, letting up 2 sacks on his side, 7 pressures. So it's just, they're not able to really put everything together from a talent standpoint. Every game, some unit, I feel like, is going to struggle. They won the Auburn game because of the turnovers that they got, and the defense really putting them in positions to win. And this one, they didn't have the turnovers, so they just didn't have the opportunity to put themselves in a place to win.
Yeah, no, and the turnover stat it needs to be said, right? To be in that bottom 100 in the country, especially if you're not matching it, like you said, in like the game in Auburn, is going to be tough for them offensively, and that's what we saw. I think a couple more games like this for Taylen Green, it could start to raise some eyebrows and some questions. Like, we understand what he can do on the ground, and we've seen some impressive flashes, but you got to be able to control the football. Like that is like number one, I would say. And so that was kind of the major key when it comes to this game. And so it leaves a lot to be desired, because you see the opportunity for them to be 5-0.
Yeah. And what was so dangerous about them in games before didn't seem to be dangerous here. Like, Taylen Green couldn't get anything going with his legs. Jaquindon Jackson had his worst game to date from a yardage standpoint, was pretty bottled up, 37 on the ground and 36 in the air. The 2 touchdowns that they scored on the game both looked like they could have been, one looked like a sack and one looked like it could have been a tackle for a loss.
Yeah.
You wonder if teams are starting to maybe figure out Arkansas a little bit. Like, Jaquindon Jackson's, every game it's gotten a little bit less and less. Like, is the team regressing, or are teams figuring out how to stop these 2 guys? It used to be a big dual threat problem.
Right. And you talked about the play that, Taylen Green was almost sacked, right? It's like they're relying on these big plays, Isaac Tesla, big 75-yard touchdown. It's like, it's exciting, but it's not sustainable, and it's not putting you in spots where you're controlling the tempo of the game. And that, to me, is why you brought in Bobby Petrino. So if you're thinking about, at least I'm thinking about, okay, how does Arkansas control the tempo of the game? More consistent running. Like you said, so let's see Jaquindon Jackson the first 3 weeks. Less turnovers throughout the game, and sustained drives.
It's football IQ plays that they're fumbling on too. I mean, it's like,
right.
You're getting hit from your blind, your backside. It's like, those things can happen, but then they're getting hit on the handoff. Like, it's these football plays that, like, it just feels like, it feels a little JV-ish at times, some of these turnovers that they're having, but I know they have the potential because we've seen them execute so well on offense. Defensively, I think they played great. They played well. They really bottled up, Le'Veon Moss and the A&M rushing attack until the end of the game, where they gave up 52 yards on 5 straight runs. So that wasn't great. But
Yep.
other than that, you're asking a lot of this defense to keep them in the game when the offense isn't fully, getting their footing.
And that's kind of what we had said in the preview, right? And shout out to everyone that watched it. Great viewership, but it wasn't going to be A&M in the passing game beating this defense.
Yeah.
Because A&M hasn't shown us a ton passing this season. Marcel Reed has looked efficient. He did his typical 140 to 170 yards game. He had 160 yards in the air, but that was not what beat this defense, and this defense kept them in the game the entire game. So when it comes to how they can close out games, the defense has been steadily improving the last couple weeks. And we've seen it in Auburn, we've seen it in A&M. But it's really just on the ground. You can't give up those rushes for 52 yards, like you said. And but it was kind of what we had noted, or what I noted, right? If it was going to be a win for A&M, it was going to come down to the rushing side, and ultimately it was enough for them to wear down the defense at the end. With you're on the field that often, you're ultimately going to get worn down. So a lot to be asked of and want there, but everything Arkansas. From what we think they're trying to get to a winning record, some more quality wins, there's still some opportunities there for the season.
Yeah, they've shown just enough really bright spots in every game where it's like if they can just put it all together, it's like, they're just finding ways to lose games. It's like three things are certain, right? Like death taxes and Arkansas finding ways to lose to A&M in this game. I think it's 11 of the last 12 they've lost in this. So like they could have had it. I was looking forward to that last drive, but if they can clean up the turnovers, I think Arkansas is solid. The defense is starting to perform. It could be a coaching problem.
Yeah.
I don't know how long Sam Pittman could be there if he just continues to lose.
Right. And I think it's like, I think I said for Billy in Florida, and like it's a matter of how they lose, but bringing it back to Arkansas, I think he just needs wins. Like I don't even know if close losses is going to help where the Arkansas fan base feels, given the coordinators on staff and what we see in terms of the talent they brought in. Like he kind of showed us you have talent, so now we need to see more, and we need to see more on the offensive side to help close out some of these games. And it's the schedule doesn't really help them, right? You got the next 4 games, you got Tennessee and you got Ole Miss. You got LSU and Mississippi State mixed in, but LSU is not a cupcake. Like they just happen to be in the 5 to 7 window for the SEC, but that's not a cupcake team at all.
No, we saw them get some turnovers against Texas this week. Like Arkansas liable for some turnovers. Like instead of they were underdogs in this game. Arkansas was. They're going to be underdogs in 4 of their next 5. They play Texas at the back end of that stretch that you mentioned. Mississippi State could be a test, right? And they need to start figuring things out, because you don't want to drop 4 of those 5 or 3 of those 5. Like, but that's what it's looking like. So I don't know what they can do right now other than just maybe clean up some of the problems offensively and start trying to get back to a clean, concise game plan.
Yeah, that's all I can really think of. And just kind of maybe simplify the offense even more, to kind of help them be more efficient and have less turnovers. And so they got a big test here at Tennessee coming up. It's going to be on prime time, ABC. It should be a fun one, and we'll be tuning in for sure here. Another game that took place on Saturday was Oklahoma versus Auburn. Another I think home game for Auburn. OU, their first SEC game, and so I want to look at this from the winner's lens. Second SEC game.
Oklahoma.
First SEC
win.
Yeah,
don't want to forget about that one.
First SEC win.
Yes.
Second SEC game. And we got to see our first start from Michael Hawkins. Do we think he met or exceeded expectations for Oklahoma's first win?
I think he exceeded the expectations. And if you didn't watch the game and you're looking at the box score after the game, you might look at it and be like, did this guy perform as well as, Oklahoma would want him to? But you have to think about Oklahoma pretty much missing every single offensive skill player on their team, and asking this guy, this freshman, to come in and perform.
At Jordan Hare.
At Jordan Hare at Auburn, who defense isn't bad. Like, it's a good defense.
Yeah.
And he came in 10 for 15, 161 in the air and 69 on the ground. And that's, I think, all that you want from a guy like that. Like, you're not asking for him to do any more than that. I think he did just enough. I think Jackson Arnold needs to figure out his, maize and blue Michigan outfits for next year when he transfers,
Oh,
maybe Mississippi State needs a quarterback, Florida State, I don't know. But
yeah.
I think Jackson Arnold's days are starting to be numbered in Oklahoma with how Michael Hawkins Jr. played in this game.
This could be a Caleb Williams, Spencer Rattler situation, and I'm not insinuating that Michael Hawkins is as good as Caleb Williams, but I am insinuating that the job may be Michael Hawkins. He did enough to keep it. He did enough to win the game. He got OU their first SEC win, and I think if I was to grade his performance, I'm going to give him a B plus. I think I'm not asking or looking for as much from him as I expected from Jackson Arnold, who had a couple starts, who played in the bowl game last year, and got some PT for them, and he was able to show what he can do on the ground. 69 yards, one run rushing touchdown, and no turnovers. No turnovers is huge. That was a huge woe for Jackson Arnold last week and at the quarterback position. Less about Jackson Arnold. What we were able to see this Oklahoma defense do against Auburn was just enough, right? Obviously being able to force some turnovers in the game and keep them in this game where it felt like Auburn, they played better offensively. They had more yards, but the defense for Oklahoma did just enough for them to win this game.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about Auburn later, but this was probably their best offensive game per opponent, pound for pound offensive performance from Auburn. And Oklahoma had the heart to come out and win this game, right? Like, quarterback played exactly like you need him to do. You have a bunch of players out, you're banged up, you're coming off of a loss in your first SEC game, and you're down. Your kicker's perfect. Auburn can't say that in this game. And your defense comes out and gets a pick to win the game. So I love the heart of the team in this and what they were able to do.
Yeah, definitely love the heart there, and an area of opportunity when we think about for OU going forward is going to be third down plays, right? From what I saw, they were 2-11 in this game. It didn't stop them from winning necessarily, but it's going to make it tougher to beat some of these teams coming up on the schedule.
Yeah, it's a tough route for Oklahoma. Like, they gave them a very hard intro to this. You're going to get some of these guys back. I would love to see the team healthy. See Nick Anderson, Deion Burks out there. Jalil Farouk out. So you're never going to see this team at full strength. So you're working with what you got.
Yep.
And I think from a game plan perspective, they're working towards that. Javonte Barnes at running back played well, 61 yards. And again, it's not like a right home about stat line, but what they're doing is putting together games that win. You don't play the spread. You just play to win the football game. All you want to do is win the football game. And they found a way to do it.
Definitely. And so for Oklahoma, they have a bye week coming up, and they have the Red River rivalry. For me, when I look at this game and I look at how the season's gone thus far, and I feel like I can only really go off of the second half of Tennessee and all of Auburn because back to the offense, it seems to be running through Michael Hawkins. This offense is going to need more some of those weapons like you talked about coming back against Texas. And from what we saw from Texas last week, and going forward, I think that this OU team has a shot in the Red River rivalry game. I think they're good enough to they're good enough to neutralize the game because I think Texas is better, of course, but I think they've shown me enough in this half of football against Tennessee and this full game against Auburn to play a competitive game against Texas. Coming out the bye.
Yeah, I think they can be competitive for sure. I mean, they gave up over almost 500 yards, 482 yards against Auburn in this game. So you don't want to have an overall defensive performance like that. Auburn missed 2 field goals, so there was a lot of opportunities for Auburn to, at the end they threw the pick when they were winning. So you had the game just went your way, right?
Yeah.
Like they did perform well. The game went their way. I think they have opportunities to win their games in the future. But they're going to be kind of scrounging week to week. Lucky they have a bye this week to game plan, take some of this in, and figure out what the plan is for Texas. So I'm looking forward to that game. I'm interested to see, and I'm excited that they have Michael Hawkins Jr. in there because I think that he gives them the chance. I love seeing that run that he broke off at the beginning of the game. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I think it'll be a really fun one. It'll be the first one they have the SEC on both their chest. And for Oklahoma, you find yourself in the win column. So at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be pretty. You won. You might have had the ball for less than 11 minutes than the other team did, but you still found a way to win. Going to Austin, Texas was able to host their first SEC game at home against Mississippi State, and this game featured Arch Manning at quarterback. Quinn Ewers was out once again for another week, and we saw some things from Austin that were a little surprising, but they came up with the win.
Yeah. Yeah, they came up with the win. And as someone who's always like SEC #1 conference, I wish that they had a better intro into the SEC instead of Mississippi State. Arch looked great. He came out, against UL Monroe. He had some of those mistakes, threw 2 picks. In this game, he was pretty flawless. Like, moved the ball around like we know that they can do.
Yeah.
Got everybody involved. DeAndre Moore had a great game. Isaiah Bond had a great game. I loved seeing what the Texas offense could do in this one.
Yeah, no, they definitely looked pretty good. Isaiah Bond is doing what he does. He's dominating per usual. They really were able to see a lot from Arch. I think he did have 1 turnover on the game, so that's he's just kind of working through, typical sophomore things. And so what was a little bit concerning in this game, and I think it kind of lends to the question, was just we saw this offense was a little bit slowed down. We saw that for the first time, I think, all year, that like Texas looked somewhat like they had some defects.
Yeah.
But they're still a bona fide contender to me. Make no mistake. Like, please, if you're watching or listening, like, let us know what you think. But this was the first game where the offense looked like there were some defects. The defense, to a true freshman quarterback, allowed him to kind of show a little bit. He had a rushing touchdown in the third quarter. Michael Van Buren from Mississippi State. So we saw them look a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure. And I preface all of this with, like,
Texas
when I'm
won.
saying it, I'm trying. Texas is good. I'm just trying. I got to nitpick something, right? Like, there's things that they could improve on every week, and I think one of them in this one is the defense. Offense for one side, right? Like, I think it's the rushing side of the ball. Like, they had almost 200 yards, but without them breaking off some of those big plays, each guy kind of broke off a pretty big play at some point. 20 plus yards for each. They didn't really do too much on the ground aside from that. That really made up a chunk of their yards, and I think that lends to Mississippi State's defensive fault. So, when you're playing a team like Oklahoma in a couple weeks, you're not going to have the ability to do that on the ground. So you're going to have a good game from your quarterback, who I'm assuming at that time will be Quinn Ewers. So as a Texas fan, you got to feel really positive about what you've seen Arch Manning do, because you know that if Ewers misses more time, he missed time this year, he missed time year before last. You have a guy who can come in and play. Defensively, they let Mississippi State do some things, on the ground as well. 150 yards. So you don't want to see that from a team who's struggling. But again, you play to win the game. They won the game handedly. Like they didn't look like at any point it was a question.
Definitely. And I think that, fans might have been looking for them to beat Mississippi State similar to how Florida beat Mississippi State, right? And, we understand where a lot of people think Florida's at, and I think it's justified. So we didn't, see them, if you're money-wise, cover, but we did see Texas look impressive offensively. Again, 26 for 31 for Arch, 324 yards, 2 tuds. DeAndre Moore, welcome to the wide receiver party. Alongside Isaiah Bond, he had 2 touchdowns. So still more of the same. Like we said, there's weapons everywhere offensively. The defense still did enough to win the game. They only gave up 13 points. So like, I almost feel like I'm talking as if like they didn't win the game. I think they just set such a high standard, right? They were number 1 in the nation, and so this is one of those games you expect them to win with some style points, and we didn't fully see it. And then, on the rushing side, just Jaden Blue's got to protect the ball, but you can have these type of games. It's still a win. And, Texas is still in that championship contention. They're still, to me, a top 4 team in the country. They are very scary to play. And the game against Georgia is getting more interesting after we get past the OU game coming up here.
Yeah. I think they could still be number 1 in the AP poll right now. I think it's just who they put there. Alabama number 1 instead of them. They could easily still be that number 1 team. And if they beat Oklahoma and Georgia, like, it could flip that easy. And then Alabama plays Tennessee. It could go back and forth.
Yeah.
In my mind, I envision Texas and Alabama will be playing at the end of the season. just based on the caliber of the teams, the schedule that they have ahead. I like this Texas team, and I think with Quinn Ewers back there, they get even stronger. Nothing against Arch Manning, but you just have two guys who are so capable and would be starting quarterbacks on nearly every team.
Yep. No, I mean, definitely for sure Arch and obviously Quinn, but you just got to get past this Georgia OU stretch, because then you got Vandy bye week, Florida de facto more or less bye week, Arkansas, UK, Texas A&M. So UK could be a tough game. Obviously, Texas A&M will be, it's your rival. You haven't played since maybe the Big 12 days, but get past Oklahoma, get past UGA, you're in the clear.
Yep. Yeah. No, the path is there. The path is there for them. So I'm looking forward to this Texas team and seeing what they can do and get a playoff bid in their first year as SEC team.
Yeah. So again, if you're listening or you're watching, let us know what you think of this performance. I mean, when you have that number one next to your name, pressure's a little bit higher, stakes are higher, people are more critical. They're still winning. Texas, you can say it. Texas is back. We don't have to hide that anymore. And so we want to hear from y'all what you think. Was this a strong performance? Did it leave you wanting more? Business as usual? But overall, I would say it was a good performance, and just there were some things to clean up. But if that's what you see with your backup quarterback in the game, I think you're gonna be all right. I think you're gonna be all right. Going back to another game that we talked about a little earlier, if you're watching the full episode, but Auburn played Oklahoma, and if you just look at the box score, Auburn probably should have won. They were not the winner in this game. We're back here. We're back to the drawing board again, trying to figure out what to do with all this talent and some glaring holes. One thing that stands out for me when it comes to Auburn as the loser in this game is, once again, we see the turnover challenges, but we saw one of Peyton Thorne's better games, in the air from a yard perspective. So that's somewhat of a positive. But it's to me, it's a tug and pull of, are we having fun as Auburn fans? Is this the team that's going to give us what we want? We went from maybe we're 0-0. Maybe we upset some teams. Now we're okay, all right, we're a bowl game. Now it's all right, do I want my blood pressure to be raised by watching these games? Should I just watch the games for fun? I'm trying to figure out what should I expect from this season based upon what I've seen thus far.
I mean, this is supposed to be the easiest part of the season. This was the easiest stretch. You had 5 home games in a row against 4 unranked teams and then 21 Oklahoma, and you leave this 2-3 to hit the road. So if you were trying to tell me, something came out where it's Auburn was intentionally losing games, I would believe you, because it's what it looks like. They're doing everything that they can to lose in games that they could easily win. Arkansas last week didn't look that good. In the week before this, they were turning over the ball just as many times. They were doing the same kind of thing. Auburn just is not performing. We finally see a good game from Peyton Thorne. He's going to be the reason they win this game, and then he's the reason that they lose the game. So they just find ways to lose. There are positives, right? They outgained Oklahoma 489 to 291. The defense at Auburn has consistently looked good this year. I wouldn't say that they look stellar. They look great. I would say that they look good.
Good.
You can't come into this game and expect to walk all over the defense at all. So I'll give them their credit, and I know that they're probably frustrated knowing that they held Oklahoma, and then Peyton Thorne goes out and throws out a pick six, a bad pick six, by the way, dead in the hands pick six. It's just the issues with Auburn, in weeks past, they have been improving. They worked on the Peyton Thorne thing. We mentioned their inability to get off the field last week with Arkansas. They did better at that this week, other than the big play where Michael Hawkins Jr. took off. The defense did a good job of getting off the field on 3rd downs. So, there's positives to look at, but you just have to finish the game.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And maybe that's the silver lining, right? You just have to finish the game. You just have to, work on the turnovers. And we saw a drastic drop compared to the average in the season with only one. It just happened to be at the most important time. The annual or weekly turnover came at the wrong time, but positives. You saw Jarquez Hunter do pretty well. This is a good Oklahoma defense, and
Mhm.
for all intents and purposes, they put up probably, I'm assuming, like top 2 in yards against them compared to some of these other teams they played against this year. I mean, I know Houston's offense wasn't going to do too much against them,
No.
that defense for OU, but for Auburn, you played impressively offensively against a strong SEC defense in Oklahoma. But it still feels like we need to go back to the drawing board. And these last 2 SEC games felt winnable. You're still looking for your first Power 4 win, and the feel there's got to be frustrations, and so for their sake, I hope it's just let's just black this out, move forward. But when you look across the state and Alabama is putting on a show, their freshman is outballing your freshman. It's a party over there in Tuscaloosa, and it looks like it's just we're waiting here in Auburn. Like we are just trying to just see some good football. Because we're used to seeing good football, and I think college football is better when Auburn's good. So I want to see it.
Me too. Me too. And they got recruits coming to these games. They had Deuce Knight coming to every game, still not flipping his commitment because he probably wants to see him win a football game. I mean, I saw after the Cal game people making jokes about Auburn being in like the Kmart Bowl or something, but like looking at their schedule, I don't know if Auburn is going to make a bowl game. So they have tough games ahead. They play Georgia on the road. They play Missouri on the road, Kentucky on the road, and then you play Vanderbilt at home. But like, who knows with that game? Like I don't think that there's a gimme left on Auburn's schedule except for, who do they play? Like UL Monroe later.
Yeah. Well,
there's no game that I could see. Like I'm like, oh yeah, Auburn's got that one.
I'm right there with you, right? I think before the season, their win-loss total was at 7.5 wins. I mean, in order to go over, they'd have to win every game.
Yeah.
Going forward, I think there's about 8 games left or 7 games left, and you got UGA. I wouldn't even call it a swing game. The defense can kind of keep them in there, but that's gonna be a tough one. Then you got Mizzou. I think that could be a winnable game.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Missouri though. You got UK. Could be a winnable game, but we're gonna need to see some things. Kind of like I said about UK last week. Like I needed to see some things from the offense I haven't seen all season, and I saw them. I need to see some things from Auburn in the form of playing fully through the whole game, not turning the ball over, not early, not late, just not at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the defense seems to continue doing what they're doing because the defense looks great.
Yeah.
But the schedule is definitely not helping them with UGA and Mizzou and now UK on there in week 9 as well. After that it's a little bit better, and then you got Alabama at the end of the season.
Yeah. They play stingy defenses this year. They play Kentucky, they play Georgia, they play A&M, they play Alabama. Like it's not going to be an easy road for Peyton Thorne, but he is your guy. The Hank Brown experiment is over. Peyton Thorne played well enough to continue to have the job, but they're second to last in college football in turnovers. Like it's not the road that you want to take. They're just behind ECU. So it's not the road you want to take.
Definitely not. So, we'll see what they have for us coming up here with Georgia. I think I said it early on in our podcast, like for Auburn, I feel bad having to play Georgia after a win or a loss, and I'm sure that Georgia's going to be extra prepared to prove something after this UK game and after this Alabama game. So we'll see what's in store next for Auburn. I think you look at the season and you look at right now, and the goals are still to try to make a bowl game, look competitive, hope to see some upside and some improvement from Peyton Thorne. And if you don't see those things, you figure out who your guys are in this current college football landscape, where the name of the game is retention and also finding your guys in the portal or finding your guys in recruiting. And so I think that's where my head would be at as an Auburn fan, or as a fan of a team that's in this area of the standings. Take the name off the chest, right? Where they are in the standings, where they are ranking statistically in categories like turnovers, where they rank in some of these other offensive categories. I would start to really reevaluate in that drawing board who we have going forward and who we want to be as a team.
Yep, definitely. It would be really nice if like last year they had a guy like Cam Ward in the transfer portal or something. But I don't know.
That's neither here nor there, right? That's
Yeah,
neither here nor there. And
who knows what they got? Who knows what they got this year? No, I'm just giving
right.
Auburn a hard time. I have to.
Yeah, and so in the last couple of weeks we did our power rankings, and we with like one of these games I think that would play a role in the power rankings would be Texas versus Mississippi State. You get to see the best team in the conference going into this week with Texas, and the worst team in the conference with Mississippi State standings wise, right? Take my opinions out of the picture. Mississippi State. Played a pretty competitive game, especially in the first half. They went into this game at halftime was 13-7. Some things to look at positively from Michael Van Buren, true freshman quarterback, 3-star recruit, came in playing in place of Blake Shapen at quarterback. And this defense looked much improved. The floor was hit the past couple weeks, but they certainly rose the bar in this game against Texas. And so those are some of my immediate thoughts when you think about this game, Texas versus Mississippi State. What were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, it's you're trying to find positives, right? Like there's things to look at. You have injuries at quarterback position. You're playing at the time the number 1 team in the country. Mississippi State dead last in yards allowed coming into this game. They gave up another 522 here. Not great, but what you got to look at on the positives, they forced 2 turnovers. You got to love that. They made a couple plays there. They did pretty well on the run stopping. Stone Blanton had a couple stops there in the run game. So you got to look at kind of the positives in what you were able to do. You slowed down Texas's offense. They could have scored way more than that if they were firing at the offensive power that we'd seen up to this point. So if you're Mississippi State, it's just kind of like baby steps at this point of putting it together. You're not going to make a jump week over week to some playoff caliber team.
Yep.
But if you can say, okay, we're going to stop the run pretty well this week, and you do that, take it as a win. I know it's moral victory, but you can take it as a win that you can improve on and build some motivation for the team.
Yeah, you got to look for moral victories. I think as a Mississippi State fan, and I'm always going to try to be a rational watcher of football, a rational fan, right? What roster you're showing up with, and that roster shows you more than you anticipated. The bar and expectations raise. If the roster shows you about what you expected or less, that bar is lower, and so that bar is ranging. But it's a bar to me that is if you're in a class and it went from a C+ to a D, and I think we're back in the C range. The C range for me is we saw improvement on defense. I want to see Mississippi State in more of these games going forward. If they're going to score, every quarter like we saw in this game, let's continue to do that. Let's score a little bit more. But that bar to me is really a measuring stick of like how we should feel about our team and what we should expect for this season. And so I think with the C+ bar, in a way, that's a good performance against Texas. That's the number 1 team in the country, right? You looked better than how you looked against Florida. You played with a freshman quarterback, and so to me, you're able to force two turnovers with Jaden Blewett from the fumble perspective. Texas is running back. And so in a loss, I still feel like I'm pointing at more positives, even though it was a loss.
Okay. Yeah. And I took this and kind of started looking ahead and was saying, if they're playing out this SEC schedule, where does Mississippi State kind of pick up a win here, right? Like, it's huge for morale to finish. You don't want to finish with no SEC wins, and what team matches up to this team? And I think right now Arkansas playing at Mississippi State is an opportunity for them to take what they did against this Texas team. Arkansas not firing as hot as Texas is. They're a little bit more turnover happy. If you're Mississippi State, you've seen that you can maybe get some of those, strips, pick up some fumbles. Who knows what the defense could do? Some of these guys are starting to play a little bit better in coverage. Bryce Pollock played pretty well in coverage for Mississippi State this past week. If you can go into this game and perform like that against Arkansas, you might pick up an SEC win. So, not that they're looking ahead down the road, but, and saying, who could we maybe beat? You're playing each guy in front of you. Right. I think that's the game that maybe lends to them winning the most.
I think that is a game that lends to them winning the most. And I think, similar to kind of my thoughts with Auburn, I think that you have to look down the road and see, okay, where do we see an SEC win? Because if we're going to be a competitive football team, we have to win in the SEC. Yes. So I'm going to be looking at, okay, how do my players look against UGA? How do they look against Texas A&M? And so when I think about what should be swing games, Texas A&M, Arkansas, maybe Missouri. And Ole Miss it's a rivalry game. So I think that neutralizes what is possible, right? Those are 4 games that you should be trying to be competitive. Arkansas and A&M could be winnable games if you do what you did against Texas defensively. And it should leave you with the idea of who are our guys in the SEC to get to that Dak Prescott, Dan Mullen level of a team and going into the future.
Yeah. A lot to look forward to, honestly, like for this team. Like when you're playing a little bit with house money. Like you want to win games, you want to engage the fans, you want to recruit well. Jeff Lebby's going to be your coach next year. Like you're not going to get rid of him.
No.
You may move around some coordinators. So you just have to look ahead and try to find positives in each game for this one. I think that they played okay on defense in some areas, some individual players for sure. Nick Mitchell, linebacker. So like, for example, just things like that, you have to find those victories to point to. But, on to next, bye week for Mississippi State.
Yep, on to the next week. And so that wraps up our show here. We wanted to go through each team and kind of talk through what our thoughts were, what was the story, what was the headline, power rankings-esque, and a lot of good football around the country. Obviously impressed with LSU. So thank you for tuning in. If you like this, feel free to subscribe to our page. We're on Instagram. We are on, of course, Spotify and Apple Music or Apple Podcasts to listen to as well. So thank you once again, and we're looking forward to giving you some previews here for week 6.